Welcome to Beyond Death, the podcast that isn't afraid to talk about death and people who work with the deceased and their relatives. We are your hosts. I am Mark. I'm a radiographer and a lecturer in forensic radiography. And with me today is...
You've got me, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. I'm a forensic radiographer and a radiographer of many, many years' experience.
And Lindsay, who do we have with us today?
Well, we're very lucky to have Rachel Duncan with us. Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
Hi, Lindsay. Hi, Mark. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
And fantastic. And Rachel, you are a Met Police coroner's officer. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I am.
Wow. So we're going to ask you some questions because we forensic radiographers are very interested in the other industries and professions that people do that connect with us in various ways. So I'm going to kick off with question number one if you're ready. Are you ready?
Yes, ready to go.
Okay, so we'd like you to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into working as a coroner's officer and how you got to be in the position you are now.
Okay, so I actually started working for the Met Police in 2007 as a special constable, so a volunteer police officer on the beat. And alongside working part-time as a special constable, I was also studying forensic science at University of Greenwich. And I was very interested in the sciences from a child. And I've always wanted to do forensics. And then I went kind of around the long route to get back to where I want to be as a coroner's officer. So I did a bit of work on the beat, in custody and HQ functions, for admin roles. I saw the job come out and I was like, do you know what? I'm going to go for it. So I've been a coroner's officer for the last 16 months now.
Wow. And are you a senior member? Are you a junior member? How does it work?
So the coroner's officer role is just one band. So we've got coroner's officers managers who governs the teams, but we all just one band. In terms of seniority, that will probably be the length of service that you have within that role. So there, some of my colleagues have been in for 10 years, some, a couple of years. I'm probably one of the newer ones, but we do have some who probably just started like a week ago or 2 months ago. So it all
I see.
depends on your level of experience, but then equally you can probably be in for 4 or 5 years and not dealt with a complex case or something tricky. So the
I
colonial
see.
world is very unique in its working history.
Wow, it does sound like quite traditional, as it were. So thank you for that. And I'm now going to hand over to Mark. He's going to ask you the next few questions. So thank you, Rachel.
So, Rachel, it's really interesting for us as radiographers and radiologists to hear from someone who's a coroner's officer because we get involved occasionally with speaking to coroner's officers on the phone, and I've met a few coroner's officers. But to be quite frank, I don't really know what you do, and I wonder perhaps whether you could tell me what the role of a coroner's officer is. What's a sort of typical day for you?
So our role is to receive the death reports, they're called death referrals, and we get the referrals from either the community, so the police will put the referrals on their system and it comes in to us, or hospital deaths, or any other care settings such as hospices, care homes, or if someone's in state detention. And we are there to perform the function of gathering all that information, understanding the person when they were in life, to produce information that goes to the coroner, and the coroner will make the ultimate decision as to where the investigation will go or if it would need an inquest. So our function is more admin function, but with an investigative lens.
Okay. And so if the coroner decides that there is going to be an inquest, is that the end of your involvement, or do you sort of follow through with that as well?
No, so I previously worked in the inner north area, so I was covering Camden, Islington, Tower Hamlets and Hackney boroughs, and I've recently moved over to South London. So I am now covering Bromley, Bexley, Croydon, and Sutton. And it depends on the jurisdiction and the coroner. So there is different teams. So you have a referrals team that receives all the death referrals and then processes that through. Then it can go
Mhm.
to an investigation team where we look at the investigations a bit more. So the postmortem has been done by that part, and then we start to look at more information that the coroner needs to make a decision if it will go to inquest. And then sometimes we have an inquest team. But also we have different jurisdictions that will carry the referral process right through to inquest. So it's
Mm.
really down to the coroner to make a decision based on the documents and all the evidence that's been obtained to see if some cases will go to inquest. And sometimes it's very hard for families to understand that process and the change in processes. But yes, it's ultimately down to the coroner, and each jurisdiction does it a bit differently.
So differently. That's interesting because so I mean, in my naivety, I'm sort of thinking, oh, well, there's a coroner and a coroner's officer, and there's like the two of you, but you're talking about teams of people. Actually, when you think about it logically, there's going to be teams of people, and you're saying that in different jurisdictions they're going to be organised in different ways. So you might have one team doing one thing and another one sort of following up. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
correct.
Interesting. Yeah, wow. And so what are the most common misconceptions about your role then, do you think? And,
I think for us, well, from the community lens, I think a lot of people assume we are coroners, and we have to explain we are the officer. We act and work on behalf of the coroner, but the decision is made by the coroner. So I think sometimes the bereaved families feel that we make the decisions, and that we should, expedite things. We're like, no, we have to wait for the coroner to make a decision. But then also, I think sometimes some of our colleagues believe that we may be mortuary technicians, and we understand the mortuary processes and that we're medically trained. I'm not medically trained, many of my colleagues are not, but we may have backgrounds in being admin workers in GP receptionists. For example, I've got background in forensics, so I understand a bit more of policing through my work history. But I think the misconceptions is that, especially when I speak to communities and bereaved families, they think we're in the mortuary with their loved one doing all our paperwork
mm,
alongside the loved one. And sometimes this is very hard to kind of break their hearts and say, we're not with them. They're in a mortuary, we're
yeah,
in the
yeah.
office.
Yeah, that's difficult because I suppose you're their point of contact, and they
Mm,
sort of think, well, you're looking after my loved one, and actually, yeah, they realise then that you're not with them 24 hours a day, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Another question that's just sort of sprung to my mind, a lot of coroners officers that I've dealt with obviously have worked for the Metropolitan Police, but I know that's not always the case. You're not always employed by the police service. Is that right?
I think I think they are attached to a police constabulary. I've never
Hmm.
known it any different, potentially probably different constabularies like Surrey or Essex,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
believe a colleague came across from, I think it may have been Surrey, and they actually go out to the crime scene and do work there, where we don't do that.
Right.
We
Mm,
receive the death
mm,
referral. So it'll be interesting to speak to different colleagues from different constabularies and see how
yeah.
they do it.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a whole new world. There we go. We could go on for hours about this. Um, but just sort of picking up, and you mentioned, working with relatives and families. How do you deal with cases, working with families when cases are complex or prolonged? Is there an example of a case that's always stayed with you that you could tell us about?
Yeah, so I think people will call me an empath. I do take things to heart, and I think being in this role, I've always wanted to do this role for a very long time, but probably didn't have the confidence to apply for the role. But life challenges has made me really go for the role and know I can give back to communities. And I think I'm a mum to a 7-year-old. She wants to be a pathologist. She's amazing. But when I speak to parents who've lost their child, that hits me very hard. But I have to really just focus and do the job in hand and do the job well so I can support those families who's going through their time of grief. The child deaths are very, very hard. But I think also what stays with me is when we have people who's died by suicide, especially when there has been mental health has been a contributing factor, and their mental ill health has declined a
Mm,
lot. I've faced a lot of mental health challenges throughout my career. So when I read the referrals and see, what they were going through, potentially their final notes, if they've made one, which people refer to as a suicide note, that really does stick with me because I hear and I feel their pain as they've written that last note.
mm,
And one in particular, one case, a young man, it just really got to me. And he was, the things he was going through in his life, I went through something similar. So some things do resonate with you.
mm,
And also when mothers had lost their life in childbirth, I had a very traumatic childbirth. So reading some of those death referrals and the
mm,
complications that they've had, and I've experienced it. I've had peritonitis, a bowel obstruction, and I've lived. So sometimes I can't grapple with the thought that I'm
mm.
living and this person's passed away, and that does trigger me sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Lindsay and I were talking this morning, about some of these issues and the things that we deal with, as radiographers in the health service, and you see difficult situations, and when you can actually identify something that you can, so as you say, empathize with, and you feel, gosh, that could be me. It is so much
Mm,
more difficult to deal with, isn't it? It does
mm.
really sort of stay with you. Lindsay, can I just hand back to you for a moment?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Rachel. I was just very interested about the last section that you were replying to our question for about the empathy that you have to understand what other people go through. And I'm just wondering what attracted you to forensics when you were younger. Was there something that happened in your life that you thought, I want to do forensics?
Yes. So first and foremost, I have to give a shout out to my primary school teacher, Miss Pluckrose. She was our science teacher and progressed to become our head teacher. And she really got me interested in science in general. And I had a passion for just learning about animals and the world and the anatomy from a very young age. I would say probably 7 or 8. And
Mm.
then I started to watch Quincy. A
Mm.
lot of my generation probably don't even know what Quincy is, but I'm a bit of an
Mm.
old school head. I really love those type of films and dramas. So yeah, I started to watch Quincy, and then I looked at becoming a doctor, but I didn't have the confidence to feel that I belonged in medical school. So I said, oh, maybe I'll look at forensics. And then I was really interested in becoming a scenes of crime officer. But the course I chose didn't lead me down that path. So I studied the forensic science. But I think just having great mentors throughout my life and
Mhm.
guided me into the path where I am now. I probably took the long way round and coming back into forensics as per se into the coronial world. But I'm glad I did because I've learned a lot on my work history journey, from being on the beat, seeing, victims of crime who's, sadly passed
Mhm.
away, or their family members receiving a death message, or dealing with people who's been hurt. That's really given me a bit of perspective and
Mhm.
understanding of the world outside the coronal services.
It's amazing, isn't it? You've been on the rock face and in your own personal life and everything. And
Mm.
big up to your teacher. That's fantastic, and we're very,
Yeah.
very glad to have you around, I must say. But also, you describing things that trigger you, like the children and stuff in your work. How do
Mm.
you cope with the emotional side of your work? How do you do it?
So I'm very religious. I just cling on to my faith. I went through a period of time where I lost my faith many
Mm,
times in my life, very young, when I was 15, 16, questioning life when things happened to me. And as I've grown into adulthood, a few traumatic experiences have happened to me. So I really cling on to my faith. But dealing with work emotions, I think you learn to just leave work at work, but sometimes it's not so easy. So, speaking to a family and they tell me how the person lived, and especially when it comes to the inquest, and they come with their pen portraits and they talk about the person in life and what it meant to them. And recently, I had a family bring a funeral program, and I've never seen that ever happen before.
mm.
And it just brought it all home. And I actually started to cry. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. This is not
Wow.
professional of me. I said, you just look like my family, like this lady looked like my gran, and just looking at
Oh,
you, you look like my aunt. And it was very, very hard. And I had to take a step out and I said, I'm so
mm,
sorry. But they were like, no, at least we know you get it. And I'm like, yeah, but I lost my ability to remain professional in that moment. And I've never done that before. So it was very, very hard for me. But I think when I come home, I just try to find um gratitude in everything that I do
mhm.
now. Yeah.
But do you know what? You showed your humanity. Yes, we all had, for radiographers, we have to be very, very professional, but it doesn't stop us from feeling. And sometimes it does spill out and it shows your humanity. And that must have been so valuable to that family, to support them, even though it was very personal and very emotional. So well done, you, Rachel.
Thank
Um,
you.
what do you enjoy most about your work?
I just supporting the bereaved families, and I think they teach me something every day. Our work is very demanding, and sometimes we get things wrong. I know I've got things wrong. I've had a few complaints in my time, and I learn from it. And I do apologize to the families and explain why I've made a mistake. Um, and I think for me, I like learning new cultures and customs and
Mhm,
rituals. And working in a borough such as Tower Hamlets and Hackney, which is heavily populated with Muslim families and Jewish families, I've learned a lot about that culture. And I knew quite a lot before, but when it came to death and cultures and rituals, I
mm,
didn't know so much. And I think it's great that I get the opportunity to speak to a rabbi, speak to a Jewish leader, speak to an imam, and speak to the communities to understand how best I can serve them.
mhm. And how do you bring diversity into your role as well, which I know is very important to you? Can you describe some of the things that you've done or that you really want to see done?
I think just by being inquisitive and having an open mind, and not taking things personally, because I think sometimes when you hear a bereaved family said, it's our ritual, it's our custom to have their loved one buried within 3 days, but you understand the task at hand and you know that's not probably going to happen. It does happen sometimes with everything,
Hmm.
lined up. But just now reaching out to an imam and say, look, I'm struggling at the moment. We can't get the person to be released because of XYZ. Can you support in speaking to the family member for me? And that works. And I think just really being understanding of other people's situations.
Hmm.
One of my colleagues has never had any bereavement in her family,
Wow.
up until last year. And I was just really taken aback by that. I'm like, I've been through so much death and bereavement, I can write a book. So for her to say that to me, it was a bit it was a bit shocking, but then I now understood how she dealt with families because she's never experienced bereavement.
Mm.
And I think it's the age old saying that those who lived it knows it, and I know it
Mm.
very well. And sometimes I can be tunnel visions and I want the best for the families, but resources doesn't allow that. But definitely I just want more people to be a bit more understanding of other cultures and
Yeah,
just learn a bit more. Yeah.
I know. Be open. That's a really good description of everything. Thank you, Rachel. One more question from me. How do you switch off from the pressures of what you do? What's your switching off mechanism?
I think just coming home and trying to be present with my daughter, um, is great that I've got a great support network and a great community that does support me. I'm very active within my community in their spaces, so that is my outlet to go and give back in a positive light,
Hmm.
because dealing with the death referrals can be very draining and mentally it is exhausting.
Hmm.
I'm trying to get back into swimming again. I've signed up to do a swimathon for cancer
Wow.
research and Marie Curie on Mother's Day, which I haven't probably trained for, but that is my outlet. And also being outside, being outdoors with nature.
Yeah.
COVID happened and that really rocked me. And I think if I worked within the coronal services during COVID, I wouldn't have coped.
No.
So I think just being outdoors. I love feeding the ducks with my daughter.
Yeah.
She's grown up a little bit more now, so she doesn't really want to come to the park and feed the ducks with me, but that's my thing I do. I go for walks, I feed the ducks, and I just take time for me and just really be grateful for life.
Do you know, it's the simple things. It's the simple things, Rachel. We know we sometimes overthink and get too deep into things, but that sounds wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to hand you back to Mark, who's going to ask you one more question.
So yes, and this is a question I love because it's always those sort of ones you get from the left field and get really interesting responses. So tell us something unusual about you, Rachel.
So I used to be a lifeguard. That's really unusual because
Did you?
I think,
Wow.
I
Okay,
think
where
for
was that?
me, Clapham Leisure Centre.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
And I think I'm a black woman, and I think I was learning to swim from a very, very young age, born out of something
Mm,
traumatic. My mum, we took us on holiday, and a lot of my family members couldn't swim. And then
right.
yeah, my mum was like, right, everyone, when we come back to England, you are all going to learn to swim. And I'm glad I did, because when I was 10 years old, I actually saved my mum from drowning when we was on holiday
Oh,
in Portugal in the sea. So I've always been advocate for water safety and learning how to swim.
mm,
And when I became a lifeguard, there was a cohort of us that were from Black African communities, and we was really grateful that we had the opportunity to advocate for our community to be lifeguards and to swim. So that is something unusual. People
yeah.
probably don't expect me to be a lifeguard.
Yeah. Wow.
But
There you
yeah, I
go.
really,
That's
really enjoyed
interesting.
being a lifeguard.
And it's
Isn't
interesting. A
that good?
coroner's officer and lifeguard. I like that.
I
Yeah.
know, kind of goes
Lindsay,
hand in hand.
you do
Right. So,
lifeguarding?
no way. I'm trying to guard my own. Um, Rachel, thank you so much for sharing all those insights with us. It's been so interesting, and I know our audience will be fascinated. So, Mark is just going to summarise what we've been talking about, and we want to thank you so much for being part of this podcast series. So, hang on the line, and we're just going to do the winding up, and then we'll go to the outro.
Okay.
Yeah, so if I can summarize, I think we've had a really interesting time talking with Rachel, and we've learned all about the role of the coroner's officer and some interesting things that I didn't know before. And obviously, it can be quite varied. It depends on which coroner's jurisdiction you're working for. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, working with families of the deceased, building up a picture of that individual. And we've learned that as with all of the work that we do dealing with the dead, sometimes that may trigger something that's quite close to our own hearts, and that can be quite difficult to deal with. But it's really important to have some sort of coping mechanism. And it's really interesting to hear the different ways which people cope. Another thing I think we've learned, and there's a bit of a shout out for University of Greenwich here, but a lot of people are interested in forensic science and do courses in forensic science. And here's another role that Rachel's been doing for the past couple of years, which is really interesting way of getting into to this type of work. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So that comes to the end of today's podcast. And if you want more information about this podcast, please check out the podcast notes. And if you like it, add some likes. And if you have any feedback, feel free to add some feedback. This may be the end of this discussion, but it's not the end of the conversation. There's always more beyond death. So stay tuned.